Picking your augment is probably one of the most important things in TFT, and today we're going to go over 9 underrated augments that you're probably not picking, and it's going to be costing you games. There are a lot of augments that are really, really good at higher ratings. There are a lot of augments that are really, really good at lower ratings. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the ones in your rating that are going to be really, really good, but you're not picking them as often as you should. So I took a look at a bunch of data. I looked at Master Plus data. I looked at some of the other ELO's datas, notably gold. We're going to use gold as the example here, but I looked at pretty much everything else: diamond, emerald, platinum, and silver, all the way down to iron. And I identified 9 augments based on this data, which shows you augments that you are underpicking. So pretty much what I did was I looked at every single augment in the game. There are like 200 of them almost. And I took a look at their average placements, how often they are picked relative to every other augment. And then I filtered that data so that we see augments that are performing well in gold above 4.35, augments that are also picked less in gold relative to the total amount of games. And also I looked at augments that perform decently well in Master Plus as well, because I don't want to just pick like all the like noob augments or something like that, because obviously some augments perform better in lower ratings than they do in higher ratings, and vice versa. I want to take a look at the augments that are really good in Master Plus and also really good at gold that are being underpicked at gold. And this is the list I came up with based on the data. So binary airdrop is probably the biggest offender. A lot of people talk about this augment all the time, and essentially people are scared to play this augment because it's very intimidating. They're like, what do you mean? I can only put 2 items on my main carry? What am I supposed to do with all my items? Am I supposed to put a component on one of them? Am I supposed to put best in slots on them? Am I supposed to just jam any item? And the real answer here is it does not matter. The augment is so good that you get too much value from it. You do not have to play it perfectly. Again, we're not going to go over augments where you have to execute them perfectly in order to do well. These augments work really well at all ratings. They're just simply being underpicked, and binary airdrop is a great example of that. You could end up getting like 8 free items from binary airdrop. I've seen that before. Obviously, you're going to have to get a lot of heartsteel drops, but it's been done. Most games you'll get around like maybe like 4 or 5 extra items from that, and from a prismatic augment, that is really, really, really good. And if you compare it to every other prismatic augments, most item augments from prismatics give you 2.5 items. So if you get more than 3 free items from it, that's more than good enough. And they're like semi-tailored. You're not going to get best in slots, so you do have to keep that in mind, but it gives you a more than usable item. If you have an ability power carry, that's going to give them either a damage item, a mana item, or something like that. If you have a tank, it's going to give them some sort of tank item. It is just really, really good. The only comp binary airdrop does not work well in is comps that rely on one carry. So if you're going Riven reroll, for example, it's one of the top comps right now. You really only care about Riven and you don't care about any of the other units. Well, obviously like Viego does do some stuff, Caitlyn does do some stuff, but like 90% of your comp is Riven. You do not want binary airdrop in those comps. You want 3 perfect items on your Riven, and that's it. So obviously in those situations, do not pick binary airdrop. But if you're playing a comp that likes to itemize a lot of different units, let's take the Ezreal comp, for example. You itemize Ezreal, you itemize Zed, you can itemize Lucian later on, you could itemize every single one of your tanks. There's going to be some use for those extra items, and that's where binary really, really shines. But you can use it in pretty much every comp except for, again, comps that rely only on one unit. But even then, you still could get some decent value on them. You don't have to get binary value every single time. In those comps, you could still take binary and then just put 3 items on your Riven. Let's say Quicksilver, Bloodthirster, Titan's Resolve, or something like that, and then use binary on everyone else. Like, it's not the optimal use from it, but because this augment is so good, it's still going to do pretty decently. The next augment we're going to go over is one of the silver augments. It's not just prismatic. Silver augments, they're more balanced, but Stationary Support 1 is underpicked a lot by lower rated players. And the reason why I think it's underpicked is because people don't want to deal with the randomness. But again, you get so much value from this augment. You get a training dummy and you get a free support item. A free support item is essentially almost like a gold augment. It's that good. And the only cost you take is a little bit of health in the early game because it's a little harder to win streak because you don't get the benefit right away. Very, very solid for what you get. And then all you have to do is play around the support item that you randomly get. I think that's a mistake that a lot of players make as well. They're afraid of like hard forcing a comp based on what support item they get. But I think that's actually a good thing to have when you're in gold because if you have direction, you get less confused. It's like when you go to the airport without a ticket, you're like, where do I go? It can be very daunting because there are like gazillion destinations you could fly to. But if someone says like, oh, like, France is really nice to visit right now, you'll be like, okay, I'll go to France. You know, that's kind of what stationary support is. It'll tell you once you get to the airport, like, oh, maybe like French food is really good or something like that, and then you'll be like, oh, okay, let me go to Paris or something. But that's essentially what I think stationary support is kind of good for. Last Stand is going to be the next one we're going to go over. Last Stand's very intimidating because this is one of the augments where I'm actually surprised it performs better at lower ratings than it does higher ratings. I would think Last Stand performs much better in Master Plus, but clearly I am wrong on that. Last Stand performs a 4.2 in Gold and a 4.39 in Master Plus. However, despite that, it is still underpicked in lower ratings. This could be due to the intimidation factor. People don't like being at 1 health and then having to roll down to 0 and missing, and then they don't know what to do. Like, I'm sure that happens all the time. You go 8th in a lot of those cases, but we're not looking at games on a case-by-case basis. We're looking at them from like a much wider perspective. We want to look at it across all the games, and we have like a ton of games here. I think we have like 2 million comps that we took a look at Gold. Like, yeah, 2 million comps. And when you have that many games, like, averages do matter to some extent. And what it says is Last Stand is definitely underpicked. So the way you use this augment, you could use Heartsteel like we talked about before, just get like a nice big cash out, use that extra life and kind of time that window, and then roll down really quickly and get a really nice team. That could be one way to use it. It's a little risky because, one, you have to really know how to use Heartsteel. You have to kind of time all the rounds, and you have to perform like a 60 gold roll down with like your Heartsteel loot that you have to deal with. It could be very daunting. So that isn't the way I would recommend using Last Stand. It's still very solid, but I would actually just use it as an augment where if you're low health on stage 3, just take it. No matter what comp you're playing, the bonus you get from Last Stand is like equal to maybe like 1.5 augments compared to all the other gold augments, maybe even more than that once it procs, probably a little more now that I think about it. But whenever an augment is averaging 4.2, that's a sign that it is really, really powerful. And that means you don't have to use it optimally to get some use out of it. So just play as normal, pretend you have Celestial Blessing and tons of stats, for example. That's one way to look at it. And just play your game as normal. Obviously, if you have like 100 life on stage 3 when this augment shows up, don't take it. But if you're anywhere below, like, let's say 70 health, 75 health, like, probably just take it. It's a very good combat augment. Next one up we have is Vampirism. So both Vampirism I and Vampirism II, so you do have a bonus augment. There are actually like 10 augments we're going to go over. Thumbnail says 9, I know, but Vampirism kind of in the same category. I think the issue with Vampirism is that it falls into the same scariness as Last Stand. People don't want to be low health, even though it's really, really good sometimes. But Vampirism is just very solid overall because it just gives a lot of value. Again, it's pretty much the same as Last Stand. So Last Stand gives 160 health, 16 armor and MR, and 16% Omnivamp. Vampirism II, which is also a gold augment, gives 50 health, 6 health, and 1% Omnivamp per 5 health missing. So if you are at, let's say, 10 health, pull out the calculator because I can't do math. So you have 90 health missing. We're going to have to divide that by 5. So we'll get 18% Omnivamp, and we'll also get 6 times 18 plus 50 health. So we get 158 health and 16% Omnivamp, and we get value from it throughout the game. So it's a little bit different from Last Stand. Last Stand does give the extra armor and magic resist that you don't get from Vampirism, but Vampirism, you get a little bit of juice every single stage of the game instead of Last Stand only helping you when you have 1 life. So that's the one small difference between the two, but you kind of use them in similar situations. If you have low health on stage 3, then you should consider taking these augments. Another one, if you want it on stage 2, take it when you have a lose streak opener. If you want to like lose streak at the start of the game, it's going to do decently. But even if you're win streaking, honestly, it's still going to do fine. It still gives you 50 health to your whole team. And also, like, as a game goes on, like, you're gonna lose some rounds. Just treat it as a Last Stand. It's perfectly fine to do. Obviously, you have to compare each individual augment versus all your other augment choices, but for the most part, that's gonna be how you're gonna use it. So next one up we have is Jeweled Lotus 3. So Jeweled Lotus 3 gives a bunch of critical strike to your team. It's probably one of the best combat augments in the game. Because it gives so much damage to your team. Obviously, some comps use it better than others because it gives a ton of critical strike chance. I think the reason why people don't pick Jeweled Lotus as much in lower ratings as they do in higher ratings is because they build both Jeweled Gauntlet and Infinity Edge. But let's take a look at those items. So if I type in, what's it called? Jeweled Gauntlet. Jeweled Gauntlet gives a bunch of AP, it gives a bunch of critical strike, and it allows your abilities to critically strike as well. So people might think like, hey, I already have Jeweled Gauntlet. Why would I need Jeweled Lotus 3? So obviously the overlap does kind of suck, but there is a small bonus. You get a 10% critical strike chance if your abilities can already critically strike. So that is pretty useful. Same for Infinity Edge. I think the bonus is the same. If we look at this one, yeah, 10% bonus crit chance. So you don't lose out on like that much value from having an Infinity Edge or a Jeweled Gauntlet. But if you have like, let's say 2 Infinity Edges or 2 Jeweled Gauntlets, like, yeah, maybe don't take Jeweled Lotus 3. But if you have one of them, it's perfectly fine to take. The overlap isn't the end of the world, and I think that's what's preventing a lot of people from picking Jeweled Lotus. But it turns out if you need a combat augment, you need a combat augment. And if your other options don't fulfill that requirement, like you have to just pick Jeweled Lotus. And I think people are going to be underpicking it just because of this critical strike interaction. What I'm here to say is ignore that and just pick it anyways because it's a very solid augment if you need the damage. One thing to note about Jeweled Lotus though is that it is much better in the late game than it is in the early game. Look at this. On stage 2-1, 4.77. The gold one is 4.7. On stage 4, 4.28, 4.39. As the game goes later and later, Jeweled Lotus is incredible. So try to pick this as late as possible. Don't pick it on stage 2. Like, it's pretty bad in stage 2. There are much better options, but obviously there are going to be some cases where you have to pick it. But whenever you see this on stage 4, always consider this. Another augment that's similar to this is Harmesis. Harmesis is really good in stage 4, not so good in stage 2. So it gets better and better as the game goes on. Those are kind of like very similar augments. Both great combat augments that are not items, better as the game goes on. But let's talk about some item augments now. So we have Phreaky Friday and Lucky Gloves Plus. So Phreaky Friday is probably the best prismatic augment. Like personally for me, I think it's like absolutely one of the best. I pretty much auto take it whenever I see prismatic augments, but if we look at average placement on stage 2, where is it? It's gonna be the 5th option. Holy cow. So that's how good it is. It's just a generic augment. It just gives you 2 really good items. Just take it. It's 2 Ornn items. Ornn items are valued at around like 1.5 items, and we said before that prismatic augments typically only give 2.5 items. So getting 3 items, even though there's a delay on it, very, very useful if the delay's in the early game because you don't lose that much health in the early game. So Phreaky Friday, just use it. You could use it on anyone too. What I like to do is whoever I buy as a headliner, I just throw Trinity Force on them because most of the time I'm going to sell that unit later. They're great item holders. So whoever your early game item holders are, just throw the Infinity Force on them. It's going to do really well. And it works on everyone. It works on AD champs. It works on AP champs. It works on tanks. It works on bruisers. Like, obviously, I think the units that make the absolute best use of it are probably going to be the bruiserish types, like the melee damage dealers. But putting it on literally anyone, perfectly viable, especially in the early game. You just want to get as much value as you can out of it because it gives every stat. So it's like any unit can use it. It's really, really good. Just use it, you know? But I think people are intimidated because they might have like an Annie holding all their items and they're like, Annie does ability power damage. So I like the mana, I like the ability power, but what am I going to do with the attack damage? Who cares? It gives so much value anyways that you don't really care about it. Let's say someone gave you $100 in like 10 different currencies and let's pretend you can't exchange the currencies, right? But you can make great use of that $100 in your home country, right? But the $100 worth of money in, like, for me, euros are pretty useless because I don't go to Europe very often, right? But like maybe like a couple years down the road I go there. Maybe I go to France, like in the airport example, and then I could use my euros then. So it's like it's just free stats, or it's like free money. Like just take it, and like the $100 that I get in the US, I'm going to be able to use that anyway, so that's already great use out of it. So you could kind of look at it like that. You do get some useless things, but most of the things are pretty useful. Next one up we have is Lucky Gloves Plus. So one mistake I find people making a lot with Lucky Gloves, also a prismatic by the way, is that the Lucky Gloves in stage 2, god awful. 4.77, you don't really want to touch this one. But Lucky Gloves Plus in stage 3, 2, and stage 4, 2, pretty decent. 3-2 is obviously going to be the best because item augments get worse as the game goes on. So Lucky Gloves Plus on stage 3 gives you 3 gloves. So you might be saying, hey, I only get 3 components and that only makes 1.5 items. But you said before that item augments are supposed to give around 2.5 items. So what gives? Well, with Lucky Gloves, it makes it so your Thieves Gloves make perfect items every single time. And Because of that, you actually get double the items because Thieves Gloves makes like 2 items, right? 1 item turns into 2. So those 3 components that you get from the 3 gloves actually turns into 3 items because you double the number. So it's really, really useful, especially if you are able to complete the second glove right away. Like if I have a glove on my bench, like I pretty much auto pick this augment. Treat it kind of like a binary airdrop. It's going to be great on like your secondary carries, your secondary tanks, things like that. And then you still have time to make perfect items for whichever unit you want. So extremely good augment, underrated a little bit. Maybe people don't know how to use it, but I always thought this augment was really good. I actually don't know why this one is underpicked a bit. For the other ones, like binary, stationary, last stand, vampirism, I can kind of understand why people don't pick these because they're a little intimidating. But for Lucky Gloves Plus, I don't know. It's like you could just keep building more and more gloves and have like a full team with like Thieves Gloves. Like I feel like that's like something that lower rated players would want to do because it sounds fun. Because one of my friends does that very often. So I was very surprised to see this one on the list. The next 2 augments we're going to go over are 2 economy augments. So first one's going to be Patient Study. Patient Study is overall like a decent augment. I like it a lot if I want to lose streak in the early game, which tends to be quite a few games if I'm playing like Heartsteel, for example. And Patient Study, it just gives so much XP. There's just really no way around it. Like there are other econ augments which give like a bunch of gold. There are other econ augments which give some XP, but not as much as Patient Study. It's just overtuned right now. Like you just get too much XP from it. There isn't really much more to say than that, but I guess people don't really want to do the math on it. Maybe that's why it's underpicked. But the way to play Patient Study, just lose streak, do a fast 8 strategy, and then roll down really quickly, typically on 4-1 or 4-2, and just play whatever 4-cost comp that you want to do. All right, next one up we have is Shopping Spree. Wow, okay, so we saw before, in case people were like paying extra attention, out of the prismatic augments on stage 2, which is the best one? Shopping Spree. Wow. It is incredible. Roll the Dice is also really good in stage 2, but like let's just pretend Shopping Spree is the best one because I'm pretty sure in previous patches it actually was. Okay, Twin Terror. Okay, you can't beat Twin Terror. Everyone was better than that one, or no one was better than that one. Let's go back a little bit further. Like I swear to you, okay, maybe Shopping Spree was never the best prismatic augment, but like you can see every single patch, it's like in the top 5 or something like that, right? But right now it's averaging a 4.14. It is good for so many different things. Holy cow. I've used this to fast 8. I've used this to reroll 3 costs. I've used this to fast 9. I don't know what this augment is bad at. I guess it's bad at going 1 cost reroll or 2 cost reroll, but every other comp in the game, which is like 80% of comps, Shopping Spree just gives so much money. It's kind of similar to Patient Study. It just gives so much gold, so many free rolls that it just is better than every other econ augment in the game. It's just, I don't know how to say this. Like, the number 10 is bigger than the number 8. That's essentially what Shopping Spree is. Shopping Spree is the 10 here. There isn't really much more to say about that, even though they might like hide it a little bit, because obviously if we compare Shopping Spree to, let's say, going long, for example, they both essentially give gold, right? But Shopping Spree, I like a lot more. It's like saying like, oh, is 5 plus 5 bigger than 3 times 3? Like, yeah, 5 plus 5 is still bigger than 3 times 3. So that's why Shopping Spree is so good. It just gives the most money in the game out of like pretty much any augment, and it allows you to stabilize at certain points if you really need to without having to spend any money. But I think the reason why this is underpicked is because very intimidating. Maybe people don't know which level to go for. Maybe people think you have to go to level 10 to get full value out of it. Maybe people are like, oh, let me use my rerolls early on in the game. But I don't think that's a case if people actually pick it, because remember our criteria from before. I want an augment that is performing well at lower ratings. Granted, it's performing worse compared to Masters, but 4.25 is still a 4.25 at the end of the day, right? And I want to see if it is underpicked, and it is definitely underpicked compared to Master players. Essentially, Masters players are picking this 140 times % more than Gold players, which is quite a big number if you think about it. That's more than twice as much. So the way I would treat Shopping Spree is just use it, just do 3 cost reroll or fast 8, and pretty much play exactly how you would any other comp. There really isn't too much rocket science about it. There probably are some other augments out there that are underrated, but that's how I kind of dissected it using data, which I think is pretty cool, because data is just data, you know, it's just a number, it just exists. But it's one way to prove that something actually is underpicked but still performs well at a certain rating. In case anyone else wants to do some of these like studies yourself, You could head on over to the website teamfight.lol for all your data needs. Maybe next video, I'm going to go over the most overrated augments that lower rated players are kind of taking. So maybe that should be fun too. But let me know if you already picked these augments. Let me know if you've been avoiding these augments. But essentially, that's going to be it from me today. Hope to see you all next time.